Look.
And that's what it's all. In the summer. Or, which is a difference of
Oh,
300,000 down.
it's been a year. I know we're only 1 month in, but it's been a year.
Okay, so does everybody know everybody here? Ian, would that be fit? John, would that be fit? And then,
Phil.
thank you, Phil.
Sometimes people call me Pete.
And then, Chris with Cost Group.
As long as the name's on the, as long as the proper name's on the check.
That's right, exactly.
Call you anything.
We cash it.
Okay, let's start this. You guys are gonna make a presentation of what you're doing on the 11th? Is that, am I right?
Yeah, our thought today is to give you an update on where we're at in the process, and then really kind of show you the latest thinking relative to development options. So a lot of you got a chance to be at the community meeting and kind of move the blocks around with the community. So our thought tonight is to kind of show you the ideas that were developed and the ones that really kind of have the most merit to kind of check a lot of the boxes relative to functionality and phasing and goals for the project. And yeah, help answer any questions on the process today.
Okay. Great, good starting.
I can give kind of an overview, I think, because we're halfway through our community engagement process. So we've had 2 meetings of the 4 we have planned. The first meeting was a listening session where we really just got a chance to hear from the community, understand the community's goals and priorities for the project. The second one was moving the blocks around. We shared the kind of site analysis, the structural report, talked about the building programming and size. And then out of that came the development scenarios. And so upcoming to meeting number 3 is the intent is all the development scenarios would get kind of narrowed down, and then out of that meeting, there would be recommended 2 options for further development. And then those would be developed through concept plans and pricing that would then result in a meeting where we'd present those 2 options, and that would narrow it down to a recommendation of a final one that would go to council.
So that comes in May, that recommendation meeting?
That is what we're working through the schedule right now, but yes, we need, I think May is the current target, but I need to pull up the schedule. Because I think it's end of May. We'll have to look at that, but yes, that meeting is TBD. We're trying to figure out how we can be as efficient with that work as we can so that we can get it done on the timeline.
So next week's the last meeting until May? Is that correct in my understanding?
Correct, yeah,
Okay,
yep,
I'm not gonna be here. I told Chad back in November, I'm going to be out of state, so that's unfortunate. So if you guys can show what you're doing, and I understand it, I would really appreciate that.
yes,
Or if you've got an idea,
yeah.
you know, I'm not gonna be upset if I don't get it all tonight. I'm not that kind of a person.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Anything process wise you want to add, Chris, or?
Can't think of anything right now.
Yeah.
John, do you want to share any of like the survey feedback that we got just on how the process has been going?
Yeah, especially with the last meeting, we had a lot of people actually turn in feedback, so we had some at the first meeting, but a majority at the last meeting. I think people really did participate, the engagement in the block exercises. I think there was a lot of fruitful conversation that came out of that. And just the share out of the program and kind of how we went through kind of each of the elements of the program, why it's needed and why we're proposing it, so.
How many respondents did you have? Just the 30 that were here at the fire hall, or did you get any online? I'm just curious, you know,
Yes,
because
I have that data, but not directly in front of me, so I can open my computer and pull it up, but yeah. But we did get more than the first meeting. We got about double or so the number of responses and kind of feedback, so.
Are you getting very much following the, on the push that's going out electronically? Are you getting much response from those?
Yes, generally, but specifically tied to the work sessions that we're having. We don't have the FAQ and other things up just yet. And so we haven't gotten much feedback on the city's website yet, but mostly the things online. The online engagement is a little bit mixed. Some people are okay with it, other people, while I'm not able to do everything that's happening in the room, and we're doing our best to be able to accommodate those people online, but the exercises are different. It's hard to do it all.
Okay. So it's valuable, but maybe not as valuable as you might.
Yeah, it's for the people who start participating in the block exercise, and we've done it before, it's more tangible, it's more fluid, it's easier to kind of understand the issues. I think the first meeting, there was probably more frustration online about, well, I didn't get to say what I wanted to say or this or that, which totally understand, that's part of the public process. But I felt like most people in the room felt positive walking out of the second one, that they got a lot of information, were really happy with the outcome, at least in terms of the engagement. I can't remember what kind of feedback we got on. Carolyn gave us any.
I've got it here from Carolyn, it was 57 online and 22 in person responses to the activity. And then received 20 online and 9 physical feedback surveys. Which doesn't really categorize that. So it sounds like there was close to 100 pieces of feedback in physical and online.
Pretty good.
I think that the block exercise that we had really piqued everybody's interest. Because it let the citizenry know just exactly what we're up against. You know, and how difficult it is in order to try and get what it is that we need in the space the size that we've got. And that's even before the soil analysis came back, you know. But I think that the next, my feeling is that the next town meeting, there's gonna be some people that are gonna be coming down from Portland in order to participate in this.
Good.
You know, the more citizenry participation we get, the better off we're gonna be.
So there are some thoughts on how to better engage the online groups for people that attended online, specifically for the activity, or an ability to at least share what they have to say. But we just knew that it was going to be difficult to try to orchestrate that virtually and do it physically. So I think that's where we're really happy to hear that there's more interest in physically coming to the next session.
Good.
Do we want to talk a little bit about going forward before we start doing the project, or some of the things that you need from us going forward?
Yeah, I think today's thought is just we're trying to think through all the different scenarios before we get to the next one. So we have 5 kind of development options that have kind of risen to the top that we can show you today that we're working to continue development. We're gonna have a community meeting on the 11th, and at that meeting, we're gonna show all the development options and then basically be able to go through the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages with each one. And then have a small group discussions with the community, have a share out of those small group discussions, and then actually have the community participate and vote on what their preferred top 2 options out of that process is. And then we're going to share that back to council. I think that's on the March 5th agenda currently, that we would share back to council. Here's what we've heard. Those top 2 would kind of get your review and thought on those 2 options before then we go into concept design and pricing. And then at meeting number 4 is when we'll have full cost estimates, floor plans, renderings for the two scenarios that we can narrow it down to one, so that's what's upcoming.
So are we looking at the council meeting itself or at a work session prior to the council meeting?
So to talk to you about that, Mayor, I would suggest the work session. Because we've been doing it, we're trying to do work sessions prior to every meeting. So that would be a good fit
Okay,
for that.
I would prefer that if we're going to be discussing something that we still need time to digest. if you
Yeah.
will.
And I think that's what these guys were thinking as well, and so we tried to push it back as far as we can. We're looking at that date as a good probability, we just have to make sure that it works within the timeline.
Right.
For you folks, but so far, the initial thought was it's gonna work that way. I don't know how much time we're gonna need for that meeting. So an estimate for that would be good.
I think an hour would be good, that we can give a short presentation up front and then give time to answer questions. I think half an hour we might be able to do it, but that would feel kind of compressed.
An hour is easy for us to do pretty well.
Yeah.
It is, and we can move that too, to the end of February. It's better for you.
Well, the end of February is next week.
End of February,
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you're right, but, yeah,
just prior to the
yeah,
March.
you're right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, this is what I'm gonna be working through the schedule with Chris and Chad on, is we need about a month to develop the designs. And then we need about a month to work through all the cost estimating, budget, cost process from it. So once we kind of nail and figure out the top two options, it's about the 2-month process before we're ready to meet with the community again. So anything we can do to move that up and identify those two options as early as possible, that will just help move up the schedule.
Okay,
But
well, we're flexible,
we're
right?
Still talking about May though.
Right, for the presentation.
Yeah.
And we need it by May because don't we have to file in June? If we file for something?
No, I think it's end of August, to be on the November ballot.
Okay,
But one of the things, so just kind of piggyback on that, and this isn't something we need to have a deep discussion about right now, but I know in the last council meeting, you made some suggestions about going forward, about pivoting towards looking for how are we going to fund this and monies and things like that. And I think that this is a good time for us to start, doing that as a collective group, to start looking at how are we going to supplement the funds that we're gonna have to ask the citizens for. So do you wanna talk about our meetings?
Said we were gonna do that with the budget process.
Well, we're gonna add a line item. But
Right.
do you wanna talk about our meetings yesterday at all, or would you like me to? talk
how about if we wait and get to the meat of this meeting?
Okay.
And then if we have time,
Okay,
not that I've got a timeline, but I would like to not drag this out until 9 or something like that. It's just, I'd like to move right along. For everyone's sake. Okay,
So to recap, we have community meeting number 3, then we're planning a work session. And then there'll be a regular board meeting in March. And we're hoping that the 2 options are chosen at that regular board meeting in March. And then we'll need approximately 2 months to come up with the content for community meeting number 4.
Right.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, and that'll put things on track to have community meeting number 4 and a work session with council in May.
Okay.
So the March 5th date that we talked about today is basically set in concrete.
I think that's what we're all aiming for. Is during that regular board meeting, we would like the 2 options voted on by the council, so we can move forward with evaluating those 2 options.
Okay, so I know that you said that you're still gonna you're working as fast as you can, but do you think that you can give that to us the end of, if we are gonna have the March fifth meeting by the end of February, so that we can digest it and be ready to talk about it when we come to the meeting? Is that
Oh, definitely.
possible? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Because after the community meeting, we're gonna leave that meeting with the voting and the top two identified.
Okay.
So we'll have that information, February 12th.
So during the work session, they'll be able to share the community feedback based on that meeting. And you guys can, you know, understand which two have risen to the top, but it's a work session, so nothing can be decided.
Right, it's just, personally, I can't walk into a situation and make a decision immediately. That is not the way I live my life. I need that 5 days, 2 days, I need to think about it.
Yeah.
So we're aiming at, on February 11th at Town Hall to put the 5 options out to the general public and have them weigh in on that.
With pros and cons.
Yes,
That's right.
that is correct.
Okay, great.
Will we be able to cipher out, like, if options, the pros and cons, like, I think of height or tsunami zone or cost or what it looks like, whatever they call that.
So we've actually created a matrix that we kind of call a choosing by advantage matrix, but what it does is it takes the options across the top. And then it takes the priorities goals that we've heard from the community along the vertical axis. And then what you're able to do is do the pro and con list, but in that matrix. So you can clearly identify, okay, these two options start to check the most of the community goals and priorities. And so that list of priorities is what we heard from the listening session in community meeting number 1. And then we got ranked feedback, so we know exactly the ranking of those priorities goes into this meeting.
Good.
So will there be cost estimates with the 5 options?
And not at meeting number 3. So at meeting number 3, we're gonna be able to say these ones are a little bit more, like, we'll be able to say the variables that change between them. But we won't know exactly the finite cost until we do the detailed cost
So you're
estimate.
gonna rank them like least expensive to most expensive or?
Some variation of that, it may be more like your restaurant review that's got $1 sign, $2 signs, or $3 signs.
Right.
But it will be in general terms, because they are just blocks on a site plan at this point. It's too difficult to know exactly what the cost will be.
So you're not gonna even give them an idea of like a low figure versus a height figure?
No, not at this point.
I think with the 5 different ideas that they have come up with, there's not going to be much of a difference between them. So it's not gonna be the difference between 10 and 15 or 15 and a bazillion, no.
I think as we go through the block exercise today with you, we can show where we think this one may be more expensive than this one because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's probably about the level we'd be able to do with the community as well.
But you won't be able to tell
Yeah.
anybody how much more expensive, it's just, there's way too many.
Correct. And this is gonna be a major cost.
It's the geotech.
But Chad said, I think 40% of the cost is what you were guessing.
No, I've always thrown. I hope not. I've always thrown out the money, that number like $2 million foundation, but that's just a guess.
Yeah.
I was the one that said somewhere between 35 and 40%. I think that the geotech. What the building's gonna sit on is gonna be probably one of the most expensive things that we've got going.
And do you guys
Would you
have a
agree?
sense of that or?
I will say it's gonna be expensive. I mean, you're building on sand, an essential facility, right? But the geotech gave us 2 kind of options for evaluation, and that's, again, with our process, we're setting up actually price 2 scenarios, so that we'll be able to have relative. Kind of this option is more or less based on the scenarios we're evaluating, but then the ability to take 2 forward gives us the ability to develop 2 cost estimates that we can then compare against each other.
But I would say with the geotech report is gonna apply to any of the options that are correct on the community, right? So no matter what happens, the site is the site, and if ground's the ground, and we have to address that.
Okay. What's next? blocks?
Yeah, I think we can walk you through the orange spaces.
Yeah.
This is the best setup we could figure out with.
We thought maybe there might be just people.
That's the first estimate we made it for the table.
There we go.
Okay, so,
Two, or you want?
It might help if you guys are.
yeah, you guys can at least stay, oh, yeah, you probably have the worst, but I'm gonna stand here, you have
I'm the
the
worst.
worst position to see what I'm doing.
Oh, my God, you said that.
If anybody wants to move closer, they can, I'll.
You explain as
Yeah,
you're
sure.
laying those out.
Right, so we're gonna start with, the existing conditions of the dark blocks. And did everybody participate in the meeting? Okay. So we're gonna walk through 5 different scenarios in which we're gonna be dealing with the big picture moves. And, we're not gonna focus on the detail like stacking of where everything kind of fits, because we're gonna develop those, but we wanna have 5 distinctive options to then kind of judge. Any questions before I start? Essentially the rules, we kind of went through the rules of the program before.
So you can frame this, this is
This
is where we are, we're approximately right here, this is City Hall, this is Pathway.
So you don't have a whole block for the drainage field.
No.
No, but it would be, well, it's a little bit smaller, it's about this size and it sits right there. About 20 by 20. So right, so this is the right orientation, north being up. And we did identify that this is a parcel that we'll be considering in one of these options as something to develop the Pacific Power properties. They're ready to go? Okay, so the first option is to essentially not touch as many of the existing buildings as possible for the first phase. So maintaining the fire station and the city hall. So what we'd be doing is demolishing the public works portions of this building. And then mindful of the setbacks that'll be required from the existing buildings just for either fire separation for a building that's gonna stay or future demolition, just a zone that we can build in. So then we have now sort of a cleaner site to fit all the program, and everybody that sort of participated, I think this was the first notion of like, okay, how much program can we fit in here? And in general, the consensus was there's not enough room for everything to fit in this area. You can get the building to fit. So public works and fire stations, large bays are the most troublesome to place, but you place those first. So fire station being right on the north side of the existing fire station, so that when it's removed, then you have your apron that's required. Pardon?
It's the east side.
No,
South.
it's south, this is north.
Yeah, and so this is on the north side of the
See,
fire
this
station
is
where
west.
where you would plan for the future apparatus bay. So then if you were to stack all the program on top of everything, it's a tight fit for all the program pieces. And then what you're left with, this is removed, you have your apron. And a stair somewhere. What you're left with is a lot of exterior space that doesn't quite fit. So parking stalls, some of the covered storage areas, there's just not enough site to make this work. So that's where leveraging, for option 1, leveraging this property to potentially get those site amounts, parking and things, then you could have a viable option to explore.
So here's a question for you. We already have some parking along on Pacific Way. Do you have like an equation where you come up with how much parking we need and how much of the street parking that we already have can we leverage to meet that need?
I think most of the parking that we're showing here is stuff that we have actually programmed. It's mostly revolving around vehicle spaces for police and fire. So they're not necessarily the public spaces and public works, sorry.
Right.
These are more like staff parking locations. I would assume, and probably should someone check, but the parking code's gonna tell you how many public spaces you're supposed to be providing.
Right, how many handicap spots and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying is you're saying that we're starting to struggle with parking there. And a question might be, would we be able to just go out there and paint out certain parking spots, say these are reserved for so and so and so and so? And would that meet this need, or is that not going to, we're going to need parking in addition to what's already out there on Pathway?
My own 2 cents on that, and it's born mostly out of the program requirements needed for police and fire.
Okay,
It would be, in my mind, more ideal to have police at the back. So where their patrol cars aren't sort of parked right on Pacific Way. And then from having dedicated spots for volunteers to pull up on when they're responding is ideal. And then you've got through the circulation flow of they pulled up, which door are they running through, how are they getting to the rig, and how are they getting out? So it probably makes more sense for maybe the volunteer spaces to be on the front side, but I would think that the police would want to be on the back.
so along those same lines, I would remind you that if you look to the rear there, that you see where our property line is, but then you see along the street, I'm not saying you could park a fire truck there, but you could possibly park the chief's car or something back there, so.
Yeah, when we were looking at, so you have with your access to your public works space, you're gonna essentially have drive access, so that kind
Okay.
of takes up that area. And then if you have your secure spaces and the
Gotcha.
trash enclosure, that also needs curb street access. So we did kind of think of like, how can we best utilize that? But a lot of it gets eaten up by just the surface nature of that side of the road.
But again, we talked about getting this property over here, and that property is already, and it would be almost nothing, you could almost leave it as is to make that some of our designated parking, and although I know it's not ideal because it's not right next to the building, I worked in a lot of public buildings, and some of them I've had to walk farther than that to get to my unit. So I understand where the chief of police, who is gonna be transporting a suspect who might be violent, doesn't want to be that far away, but we might be able to make that work over there for parking, for sure.
So when you talk about the trash enclosures and stuff like that, is that like what we've got out here?
Your
The-
dumpster.
The yard dumpster and all that business?
Recycling.
There's some of those elements, but what I was referring to is just like your trash enclosure in front of the building.
Right, but what's
So,
option two?
so I'm just curious,
Yeah.
so let me just be clear about this. So your guys' feeling about doing it this way is that it's really crowding stuff in?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no doubt about, there's no doubt about it, no matter what you do on the site, it's a tight site. And then working around the existing buildings, which is what we should start with. That is also makes it very tight, and then the addition of needing to keep the apparatus dry, warm, functioning while we're doing construction. That's the third component that makes this site particularly challenging. Not insurmountable, there's a way, but it just makes it a little tricky.
So if we were to look at the ground floor of this option, your apparatus bay and your public works work bays, they take up the majority of the footprint. So there's a lot of inefficiencies if we were to take a finer detailed look at what's going to be going in this building. There's less ideal probably relationships between program elements, just because of you're going to hem in on all edges.
I think the other piece of this, though, and is an issue with a lot of them, is that it does take certain spaces like the multipurpose room that's used for classroom space for the PD, but also as actually community meeting space. That's now upstairs and is a maybe less community friendly necessarily, because you gotta go to the upstairs necessarily.
Would you be required to put an elevator in?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
anything 2 stories requires no.
And a stairwell.
2 of them.
Two of them.
So yeah, that's one of the fire tower. There's a question of that serves double duty as useful for the fire department, but also as a second unit.
So you want to go into the second option that starts to utilize that other property?
Okay, so we're gonna do this again, just so that we don't lose anybody. The actual options. So the first move here is to take away the public works building, the existing building, and then to build your public works facility over the adjacent property. So then this now can act as your temporary fire station enclosure, and then this could go away and you could build. So,
When you wanna build that adjacent property before you.
sorry, that's, I got it, got before I had to turn. So this is just trying to alleviate some of the site pressures that we were having in the option one. So this is now taking that same approach of locating your fire apparatus. Really, you basically have this opportunity. We looked at trying to get access on that north road off first. And there's just not enough turning radius, and that road is not designed for the pullout. So it really has to be accessed off Pacific Way. So from there, you have a little bit more opportunity to locate where your public functions lobby is and other sort of police functions. And then now you have potentially space for some of those site elements is what. And fire station would go away and you'd have your fire apparatus apron on the front.
And the advantage of moving public works over to the east over there is that is a critical infrastructure. So the foundation and the building and everything like that, and for the temporary fire apparatus while the main facility is just being drilled and built. That alleviates that.
Is it a two-story public works building?
So in this scenario, I think we'd have to make some compromises to the required area to get it to fit. We could have the storage as a mezzanine level. And then the admin could maybe still stay in the main office building. But so it would just be a warehouse, but we would take advantage of the mezzanine scenario.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so there would be some additional program, like the systems that would be required to function as another standalone building. There would be some redundancy in square footage, so you have some additional square footage.
Does it make a difference foundation wise if you put the public works building over there, 1 floor versus 2 floors?
In terms of, 2 floors has a more robust foundation, but not significantly. That would be probably a slab on grade building. Though we still have to account for the poor soils in some capacity, so there may be more to it.
Do you have to drill pilings for public works?
If it's non-essential, probably not.
Okay, so slab, you're saying concrete,
Yeah.
some sort of a concrete pad.
Do you have to build a building to earthquake standards?
So you do not, by code, you are not required to build public works to that standard. I will tell you that some communities that we've worked with have gone ahead and done it anyway, because public works has a function after an event. But Preston's right, there's no code requirement that tells you that you need to.
Two things there, so it would depend on what we're doing with that second floor, right? Because what we want to avoid is putting yet another elevator in there.
Yes.
Exactly.
So if you do like loft storage or something like that you could access with
Right.
forklift,
Right, exactly.
fine, but if you put offices up there, then yes, it becomes that much more expensive. So what we have to remember is that if we're moving police and fire out of here, we have this area of the building to either do away with or work with, depending on whether we need more space or whether we need more space to work with here, or whether we just need to put staff in there.
That's a good one.
All right,
Okay.
ready to move on to number 3? All right, so I gave you a little preview. We'll again start with the same. So the first move would be to develop that site to then free up. So you'd have that temporary enclosure for your apparatuses. And then now you can clear the site to then locate everything a little bit more appropriately to at least the street. So your first move could be that the fire apparatus could now get closer to Pacific Way and program as well. So if you had a lobby near that also can take place. And so this is a scenario where you'd still want it to be a 2-story building. But but you have a lot more opportunity if it's an L-shaped building. We know that just understanding the site orientation, that an east-west bar is more advantageous from a sustainability or natural solar heat gain perspective. So, but now you have more room for either future expansion and locating all your sort of site elements a little bit more appropriately.
And a little bit of room to grow.
Right. You could also take the approach of giving a little bit more relief off of the city hall, since scale wise, you know, it's a much smaller building, and that just helps for its constructability. Potentially, if you're, when we're looking at the site, you can have now access off of Pacific Way through the site. So there's some advantages as well there.
And maybe having a new city hall at some point.
Right, so the next two, so I guess,
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
yeah.
But now we'd like to show you option 3.
Yes.
4.
In this scenario, fire's covered because they're going to be operating out of the public works. Where's public works going to be operating out of?
That's something for us yet to solve, but you know, those ideas of whether or not we lease some land, put out portable buildings and some connex temporarily to get them installed, they would be able to work around that. I've had multiple conversations with Mark and his men about that.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to do it. We may have to look at leasing some land across from the grade school. You know, the grade school comes in and comes out of the realm of possibility, you know, with our dealings with that owner. Or there's also looking at some storage unit space as well, to lease some of that.
But it's far less critical than fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a fairly easy fit.
Yeah.
That's,
There's still this third leg of the stool, so.
they are, but they're easier, that leg isn't as, that one's gonna be easier to fit into someplace here in Gerhart than a bunch of fire trucks and apparatus.
Okay.
The problem
Thoughts
that
on this?
Seaside had is that they were parking all of their vehicles outside and they can't, not only did their project went beyond their time that they expected it to, which meant that they were getting into the colder weather and running into the same problems that we would run into, and it's just not,
And they had to pull their rigs inside every night, they had to pull them out in the morning inside every night when they're working.
yeah.
And I also heard that they put some rigs at their public works.
In an enclosed,
Enclosed,
Yeah.
so.
Which I imagine is a little easier to do when you have a bunch of paid staff, but when you're working with volunteers, it's tougher to do.
You could teach us all to drive the rig.
one application, I'll put you through training.
Yeah.
I think you got a third one?
Yeah, so
Only run with the lights and siren.
Then you get certified, we'll do it.
That was 3 is 4.
right, this is number 4. So the first move on this option is to get rid of City Hall.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about why that is potentially feasible, because we know that it's something that has come up in the community in the past and maybe hasn't had much traction. It's primarily because once these functions are gone, both for police and fire, and if you envision that the meeting room spaces that we're already providing, the multi-purpose space that is used for people classroom, but could also be function as city council, then the only things left in this building are 2 offices and reception.
We need more offices.
Sure, and that's fair, but it made us realize that if we're juggling around the existing building, which is 1972. There's opportunity to potentially move it and incorporate it into the
And
main.
where are the city hall personnel gonna go?
Same conversation as public works.
Temporary buildings.
Temporary buildings.
Are you
or similar
showing this
location.
in any particular order?
No,
No, I think the first one was just that that was where everyone kind of started with, and then after that, if the last 2 do impact City Hall, so maybe that's the most dramatic. I think if you're thinking about the opportunities, the last 2 provide maybe more flexibility to kind of develop the site, but then there's some real challenges to that as well. So, yeah, the city hall function can be reduced quite a bit, so we wouldn't be trying to incorporate the existing footprint into the facility, but this would now be incorporated as a development. So here, the first move here would be locating the fire apparatus, the new fire apparatus. That then allows you to take out the rest of these buildings. And now you have the ability to develop this site with all the programming. And
Now be City Hall using the multi-purpose room for the programming.
right. Yeah, and so that function could increase a little bit to make sure that that's still functional.
Meeting all.
It needs to.
Wait, so we're in this scenario, where are you putting City Hall?
Half of it's in the new, they're gonna build, and the other half they're using the training room. So it's incorporated into the new building altogether.
Yeah.
Well, there's only one Wednesday night, it'd be a problem, right?
Correct.
We can always change that.
For who? The entire county fire department, Wednesday night.
So we don't you want to put that brown, our brown.
No, so,
Go ahead.
yeah, so I took this extra block.
Okay.
And so that representing the amount, so this would be, City Hall now moving back into, this building. So we're adding a smaller amount of square footage, but essentially having a full, development with all the functions in it.
Without the need to buy the adjacent. Right. So that is a cost right.
And getting back to some of the conversations we had earlier, with so much of this project going into the foundation, just a little bit of an addition like that, I mean, how much is that gonna equate to for your average taxpayer? Is that really gonna make a huge difference in his bill, or just, you know, I mean, it would
Yeah.
$5 a month, $10 a month? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, that portion of it, building the space, once you have the foundation and the mechanicals and everything that are really expensive done, all of this other like to have really doesn't run into a big cost for your average taxpayer. Is not gonna make a huge difference.
Right.
The money's gonna be in the foundation and mechanicals.
I mean, don't you get, with this scenario, don't you get back into the sort of crowded together, not much room for expansion?
Well, you have some ability, to not just sit, hugged up in a bar. You have the opportunity to now push forward. Depending on how you, use this side, some of the program could start filling in that zone. So this does provide,
This is actually your most flexible,
right?
this is your most flexible option in terms of building exactly what you want, where you want it, less constraints, because you're effectively clearing the entire area and building new.
Where's Public Works in that one?
The public work would still be off the back end.
Oh, okay.
And you're not leveraging the little property next door.
That's correct.
That we could lease and throw some, you know, some portables or whatever to operate out of temporarily.
During construction.
Is that, I mean, is that an expensive piece of property that we're thinking about?
Well, we tried for free, and those of you that thought that would be a silly idea were right, but it was worth a shot, right? It was valued at 200,000. We would probably offer maybe 150. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. That's up to you. We didn't want to get into going for this piece of property. They're willing to sell it to us. We don't know what the price is. We need to wait till the public feedback comes back and we start heading in a direction before we do that. If we start working on that deal now, then the public will say that we're pre-baking the cake.
We're also willing to lease it to us, correct?
They will, yeah, well, yes. They're willing to lease us to it for as long as they would like to lease it. They haven't really given me a
You never go
timeline.
wrong in purchasing property.
And I think that we could probably solicit funds from some people up on the front. They would be willing.
Buy it, you mean?
Would be willing to donate into a fund. Purchase that from EPNL.
So what you can see is some of the options almost require the purchase of that property.
Right.
And then, you know, this option it's completely optional. So if this is option 4 that we're on, there could really be a 4A that, or a 4B, you're purchasing that property as well.
Using it for something.
Using it for something or temporarily for public works and city hall, since those are gone. So we don't want to cloud that with this option necessarily, because either will work, but some of the previous options, it was all about required.
Right.
So do you guys think that this scenario is adequate to take us 20, 30 years into the future?
Yes, absolutely.
So
From that
to
perspective,
keep in mind though, it's not just council meetings and fire trainings, it's planning commission meetings, it's court dates and everything that there'd be a lot of scheduling stuff that you're cramming in one multi-purpose room.
During 2006, they had two different rooms. One was for the county, and then the other was a training meeting. They
One was
drove up.
council, one was.
Court council meeting and then a training meeting. And these guys do have requirements, so we'll have to work that out. You might have to take some of the extra space and maybe make something a little bit bigger or divisible or.
The one thing I do like about these options that don't have the kind of straight bar approach that Phil had initially, where these functions pull forward, is a piece that we haven't talked about because we're not in that phase yet, but is the character kind of conversation about the building. When you look at the other properties that are here that start to make up your kind of core downtown, they're all retail frontage pushed to the street, right? The apparatus bay can't be. We need this apron up front to be able to pull the fire apparatus out and work on it and do whatever. But if you start to have more community oriented functions in here, this could now pull as close as we can get it, depending on what the rules on the setback are, to start to reinforce the other buildings that are already down here and set up an expectation for whatever happens with this to start to create a more retail oriented sort of corner.
And since character was brought up, one of the previous options where we would build like public works on the
Right.
power utility, in terms of driving into the city down Pacific Way, it's not exactly like the nicest thing to look at the public works building first, an open building. So this is a little bit better in terms of curb appeal.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing to mention is when you do develop this site for the building, you don't really have any laydown space for outdoor storage, that kind of stuff. So that has to still find a home.
This junk that's over there it's just not aesthetically my favorite. And then I initially thought we would be best to build a second building for public works. I'm not so sure now that a second building is the most cost-effective way, again, going into what it would cost to just incorporate it into the main building. I don't know that building a second building would get us as much bang for a buck as I initially thought.
Okay.
All right, so the last one, number 5, is very similar to this. But it is what Chris was alluding to. Developing the public works site. So that now you have the freedom to essentially wipe the entire site to develop. You're not necessarily held to the fire apparatus. We can start to consider what actually makes most sense to where it locates. And then it frees up a little bit more play area, but that's essentially the difference. So it's not much different than what we were just looking at.
It does give you the most flexibility with your site to do whatever you want, but also future flexibility to expand or develop something else behind you or anything along those lines.
But before we expand in 20 or 30 or 50 years, that's where the glass recycle and the lawn debris all of that unsightly
Yes,
stuff.
right. It'd be the short-
Mentioning there's plenty of room for them behind.
Absolutely. Definitely. Those are the 5.
Those are the 5.
At the moment.
And 6, if anybody else has any great idea.
Yeah, I don't think we're stuck necessarily on 5, like we're going in with 5, right? It's all a conversation.
And this was based off of people's feedback. This is based off the work that we did and the community that was
I did.
working with us.
Yeah, so we took photos of each of the groups and basically distilled, like, there's some nuanced small changes, but a lot of the groups landed on these five.
I don't think it's a mandate, but there were multiple tables that thought, why are you keeping the city hall? That was a comment that kept coming up with these groups as well. And which was curious.
Yeah, now you have to figure we got a skewed population that are participating.
Very small amount of people compared to how many people we're actually dealing with town. And there's the challenges, how to communicate that.
Well, I think that's a smart thing, you know, we'll see what comes out of the recommendations, but if this option does become one of the top two, we're gonna price it out relative to another option, we can see those cost trade-offs, because not purchasing that property in the previous option, right, and being able to build exactly what you want with the footprint you want, there'll be some cost efficiencies with that.
Like I say, I think the next meeting that we have with the general public is good. Now that everybody's, you know, seen what the challenges are, and they've, you know, we had 6 tables there, correct?
Yeah.
And you came up with, you know, 5 or 6 different options. And they, my walking around and everything like that, I mean, there was a lot of discussion about, well, gee whiz, you know, I mean, we really have to be able to cram everything together. And, you know, I mean, it was a real challenge. These people here, I mean, the folk, I've got a friend of mine that lives up on North Ocean Avenue. He wasn't able to be here, but he was able to participate via the Zoom deal and everything like that. He's gonna make it to the next meeting, and I told him to get a hold of all of his friends and have them come down here and get involved in this. Because, you know, I mean, everybody in this town pays taxes. And not everybody votes. So,
The only means they have is to give us their feedback.
yeah. And that's what's gonna sell this thing, is the public feedback.
Well, so I kind of feel like since we're, you know, Public Works is a big part of this discussion, I kind of feel like maybe Mark should be.
Mark's been participating,
Okay.
but it really, yeah, I mean. He is and he will, but there's not a lot for him to say at this point.
Yeah, I think if you go through his current operation, he's at the point where he's saying anything's gonna be an improvement, so I don't care.
Oh.
And we may have to still cut out a little bit of, you know, what he wanted, depending on how these prices come in there. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get a welding bay in. You know, everybody else kind of gave up a bunch of pieces. Mark hasn't yet, and that's one of the issues that may have to come up.
I mean, the discussion started out with, well, you know, we want this. Well, you know, there's wants and needs. So these 2 guys here, you know, really pruned down what their needs are. I mean, their basic needs, and then maybe depending on, you know, what happens, maybe we can put a couple of cherries on there, you know, to make it quite not so sour.
Well, I think that's why my concern is about the, you know, having the flexibility to be able to do something in the future that might give them
Right.
some more of their
Right.
wants.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not, the needs are the future. And so the building, for instance, my squad room where my officers would have desks. Having that for 5 desks, enough room to do that in the future is, I mean, that seems reasonable. You know, if we're not gonna be a 10-man agency for the next 30 years, right, I would imagine, but we may grow to 5 or 6. And so having that space is important.
Now, at the cancer center where I worked, we had a big workroom about this size. Desks all the way around. And 10 of us worked in there. It's noisy because there's a lot of phone work. But other people could go use the desk. I only worked a couple days a week. Other people worked on that desk when I wasn't there. It was a very efficient way to First of all, get a lot of team members talking to each other, as you're right there. I don't know, so I mean, I just throw that up, design wise, 5 desks he's talking about.
And we've definitely set that up as a squad room where it's one space and we're getting the most efficient compressed use of that space. By getting the stations and everything, and it's not like individual offices for every person.
Definitely,
Yeah, there's a lot of efficiency working with the team that we were able to find in that layout.
super, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, both of us turned out 100 square feet. Not that, so we took out a lot.
Yeah, that sounds definitely.
Okay. There was a lot we took out, what can we share, police and fire, and what can we share just in our own stuff, we took out a lot of stuff.
Good. Not that you took out, but good that you trimmed,
Everything we felt we could.
good.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's limited space for, for what's needed.
Right,
But what I like about several of these designs, is they give us the flexibility to where, and they give you the infrastructure now by taking care of the mechanicals and everything else. You can add on to it, whereas right now, if we wanted to add on to this building, we could not add on to this building. It is so old and antiquated, you couldn't add on to this building, you can't add on to that building, you can't remodel that building. But this would give us the ability to grow in the future.
I know this isn't that important right now, but do you guys have a sense of what the exterior might look?
So the next community meeting that we have, where we show these options, we're gonna talk about the options in the first half. And then the second half is what we call just a kind of character exercise, where we'll have a lot of imagery up. We'll ask people to go through post-it note exercise of what their preferences are. Obviously, at the end of the day, it has to fit in with your community. It's not, the design doesn't really come from, the character doesn't really come from us, it comes from your community.
Like, what would you call that type of design?
That is, I'm not sure what it is.
Traditional.
It's sort of a craftsman,
That
Cape
looks like
Cod-ish
Cape Cod.
looking, yeah.
If you want no maintenance at all, use Corten steel.
No,
There we go.
Well, I don't really want shapes that have to be replaced every other year.
No, Corten steel, you never have to paint. It's ugly.
Right on line.
That's why my wife did not let me do anything in the kitchen remodel.
Yeah. That'll all come down to when we get to the budget talks, and we'll be talking about finishes, whether we're going to do something that we know is gonna need maintenance down the road, or whether we throw in more money and do, cement siding. That's all finishes and where we need to save money in.
and do you always put the same type of roof on these types of
No.
buildings?
It's all dependent. So we did the Lincoln City's police station, it was done and finished in 2020. That is a concrete shingle, not even like a fiber cement, but a full like cast concrete shingle, almost like a clay tile defined.
On your, so it was a rooftop.
It's a rooftop.
Yeah.
And it's wall and ceiling. The benefit of that, which we didn't expect at the time, was that when the fires got awfully close to that, it was a very fire resistant construction. And it's incredibly durable, you don't have to replace those shingles.
As long as you got a really good underlay.
Versus
Yeah.
the
Yes.
water treatment facility, which is a concrete block and filled in building with an exterior that made it look more residential.
Right.
Yeah.
And it takes some maintenance, and we painted it twice, I think.
And that might be another place where we look to reduce costs or add costs, because different types of groups will require more structural, something to hold it up versus others would be lighter weight, so. I think everybody is gonna be on board with getting something that's not a flat roof for the most part.
Not that this has anything to do with it. Why was Joey able to keep the hose tower in brick? I mean, he took all the brick off the rest of the building because in a seismic event, it's gonna be falling
I don't
down.
know, maybe because it's just attached to the building and they reinforce the building, I have no idea, that's a good question.
This tomorrow, you ask him.
Well, good timing. Is there any other questions from anyone to anyone? I thought it was a great presentation. Thank you for showing us the 5 different scenarios. Excuse me, 5 different ideas. I really like the last 2. But then I'm. One person is right.
No, it was interesting that the non-committee members, first thing you guys asked is, what are we doing with City Hall's doing? Because that was a discussion that these guys brought up, you know. I mean, that was one of the questions that they asked. I mean, why are we keeping this antiquated building and not incorporating it, you know?
Well, it has its charm, mid-century, modern.
Yep.
Kind of got that charm to it, but we can't add a second floor, so it's.
But if you look at this thing here, which was designed in 2006, okay? Warrenton had just finished building their municipal building. And it is ugly even for downtown Warrenton. Okay, and this thing, well, in addition to the fact that city had just asked for $11 million for the water bond. You know, they objected to having something that looked like Warrenton. So by doing it a little different, you know, maybe, you know, more aesthetically pleasing for the community. Because that thing there definitely does not belong, for me, does not belong in downtown Dearborn.
No. I honestly believe it'll sell with shingles. Because everywhere else is covered in shingles. But that is just one person's opinion.
I realize that, but I mean,
It's a maintenance.
I used to buy and install sidewall shingles for $100.
Yeah,
They're $240 a bundle right now, and there's 4 bundles per square plus labor.
right.
When I remodeled my house, I had several people come and tell me that I had to put shingles somewhere on my house. So, you know, we did the hard siding all, we had one wall that's under a covered porch, and that is my shingle, there's my ode to your heart. Shingles in
I
there.
didn't know that was in the building code.
It's not, I don't know.
Well, there-
Code enforcement definitely.
well, I should say, the same guy asked me if we were just gonna tear down our house, and I was like,
I just bought it to tear
Open up your
down.
checkbook, buddy.
no.
All right, is there anything else that we need to discuss with you gentlemen? Do you feel good with what you did?
Oh, so good, we'll be back on the 11th.
How you guys feel?
Now's the time to ask questions, unless you wanna have more of
I'm
these.
not gonna be here, so I don't have any say.
No, you guys say right now, you're mayor.
I already did, I said our last 2 were the ones I favor.
I would suggest that we consider down the road having another one of these with just us, where we're not paying them to be there, and we start talking about funding sources and how we're gonna attack the different ways that we're gonna pay for this. Maybe do it before a city council meeting at some point in the future. So that we're ready to answer questions in May when we make it different, yeah.
Since we're booked
Yeah.
already.
Pardon me. I'm driving.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. You had all carpool?
Yeah. They have to.
We have to.
I looked it in. Knuckles on the table. Cause I didn't have my gavel.